The January 6th Select Committee held their 7th public hearing where they went over a lot more groundbreaking information. Some stuff we've heard already, some stuff we haven't. And one of the highlights of it was that Trump's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, who was obviously very close to Trump, would give legal advice to him as his White House legal counsel. He did pre-recorded interviews. I think it was something like 7 hours of interviews, and they debuted those clips, how he felt in the build-up to January 6th about Trump's plot to overturn the election and all those things during this hearing. Usually, the past hearings have had kind of one big main topic that they're trying to address during the hearing. This was not like this. This one kind of jumped all around to different points, and so that's going to have to be how I cover it, is just, here's a bunch of different stuff. It's all important, and you need to be aware of it all. So we have so much to go through. Bear with me, tons of clips to go over. But it's all so important, so I want to make sure you don't miss it at all, miss any of it. So first, as I mentioned, Pat Cipollone, White House legal counsel to Donald Trump, established how many close people to Trump, how many of his allies, how many of the people who were advising him made it clear that his theories were not based on evidence, and he should not be acting in the way that he was to overturn the election results. So we'll look at a few clips of Pat Cipollone admitting that's how he felt.
Do you agree, Mr. Cipollone, with the conclusions of Matt Morgan and Bill Barr, of all of the individuals who evaluated those claims, that there is no evidence of election fraud sufficient to undermine the outcome in a particular state?
So I can't do much about the audio of some of these clips, super bad on the part of the hearing, but I will read out a little bit whenever I feel like y'all can't hear it. So he just asked, based on the analysis of other people, including William Barr, election wasn't stolen. These claims were false. Do you agree with that? And Pat Cipollone is just now saying yes.
Yes, I agree with that.
So why do they keep beating this drum of, let's show you all of these people close to Trump who refuted his claims and don't believe it now, but also claim that they didn't believe those theories back then? Well, the reason is, if they can prove that Trump in any reasonable world should have realized his claims were false, but he kept saying them, he kept perpetuating those lies, then he may be more morally responsible and more possibly criminally responsible if it can be proven he wasn't just also misled by this false information. So here's another example.
On a broader scale, a bad idea for the country.
To have the federal government.
Right here, they're going over Sidney Powell's idea of the federal government seizing voting machines, seizing local voting machines in an attempt to prove fraud. And he's asked, did you think this was a good idea? Or you said that you thought it was dangerous. Why?
Seize voting machines? That's a terrible idea for the country. That's not how we do things in the United States. There's no legal authority to do that. And there is a way to contest elections, that happens all the time. But the idea that the federal government could come in and seize election machines, I don't understand why we even have to tell you why that's a bad idea. It's a terrible idea.
I agree with that. The way that he said you are able to challenge elections is, of course, through our judicial system, which the Trump team attempted to do and failed because there was no evidence. Apologies. And the last example with Pat Cipollone of him not subscribing to these ideas, this was Trump's legal counsel next to Trump each step of the way. But at that time, he wasn't even on board, showing that Trump should have been aware himself that he shouldn't be perpetuating these lies. That's the idea of sharing all of these clips from his testimony.
My view is that the vice president didn't have the legal authority to do anything except what he did.
They've both told us, Mr. Philbin and Mr. Jacob, that they looked very closely at the Eastman memos, the Eastman theory, and thought that it had no basis, that it was not a strategy that the president should pursue. It sounds like that's consistent with your impression as well.
My impression would have been informed certainly by them.
So he agrees with the sentiment of Vice President Mike Pence had no authority to reject the election results, send it back to the states, and attempt to keep Trump in power. unlawfully. So again, even though it seems a little weird, okay, great, people near Trump didn't believe his claims. Why does that matter? Well, the reason is a defense of Trump could be, hey, he was misled like all these other people in the country. Why are you blaming him for saying lies if he didn't know they were lies? So what they're trying to prove is, look at all these people close to Trump who clearly knew at the time that these were lies, expressed that sentiment to Trump, and he didn't care. Next thing, a quick funny sort of, all of this is sad, but also a little bit funny. The Speaker of the House in Arizona, who interacted with Giuliani, confirms that at one point, Rudy Giuliani said, we have a lot of theories, but no evidence.
At one point, did one of them make a comment that they didn't have evidence, but they had a lot of theories?
That was Mr. Giuliani.
So Rudy Giuliani, who's going around being one of the leaders of this effort to overturn the election results and claiming confidently that the election was stolen, says to the Arizona Speaker of the House, because he's trying to get the Arizona Speaker of the House to be on board with this and reject the election results. He says to that guy, listen, we don't have a lot of evidence, but we got a lot of theories. Okay, well, that doesn't do you any good, and that proves you knew there was no substance to the things you were saying. We will get to a story later in a different segment that was super fascinating about how there was this heated White House meeting between the more reasonable Trump aides and the less reasonable, the Sidney Powells, the Michael Flynn's. So we will cover that in a future story because it's a whole thing of its own. But in the kind of chronological order of this hearing, that was then laid out, as we'll discuss later. But we'll skip over that for this story. They did a lot of coverage over how Trump's tweets affected these different radical groups, and they dove into just how deeply disgusting many of these radical right-wing white supremacist groups' intentions were for that day, and how there was all this chatter when Trump said, be there on January 6th, is going to be wild, and all the other claims he was making, all the other encouragements for people to come up to Washington that he was putting out there, and showing how directly they even interviewed someone at Twitter. You would just see this spiral out of control after he would make those statements of these radical groups starting to prepare very specifically, calling for bloodshed, calling for the mass murder of Democrats and the attack of Washington, and all these things that would happen right as Trump would make statements to his audience. The radical elements of his audience would then begin planning for January 6th. And so they did a lot of diving into the reality of that in the build up to January 6th. That was super fascinating. No notable clips to show from that, but that's kind of the summary. Another impactful moment was they read text messages between Brad Parscale, former Trump campaign manager, and someone else who was discussing after January 6th with Brad Parscale how he felt. And he admitted that the blood's on Trump's hands. This is Trump's fault. I don't know how Trump is living with it. Crazy stuff.
Mr. Parscale said, quote, "This is about Trump pushing for uncertainty in our country, a sitting president asking for civil war." And then when he said, "This week I feel guilty for helping him win," Katrina Pearson responded, "You did what you felt right at the time, and therefore it was right." Mr. Parscale added, "Yeah, but a woman is dead. And yeah, if I was Trump and I knew my rhetoric killed someone." When Ms. Pearson replied, "It wasn't the rhetoric," Mr. Parscale said, "Katrina, yes, it was." Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
So Trump's former campaign manager, someone who was very intimately close with him for much of Trump's campaign and the build up to what he eventually became politically, saw as clear as daylight, as we all did, that this is on Trump's hands, this is Trump's fault. And how could anyone live with that and continue to tell the lies that led to that destruction? Next, they brought a witness live who was a former Oath Keeper, and he shed light on how dangerous these radical right-wing white supremacist organizations are that look up to Trump. And so in this clip, he talks about what caused him to leave the organization. And the reason I'm playing is it just shows you guys there is some dangerous, terrible ideology out there. And it very largely is on that far right part of our country that looks up to Trump.
There came a point, there were many
This was him describing why he left the Oath Keepers.
red flags, and I probably should have broke with them much earlier than I did. But the straw that broke the camel's back really came when I walked into a grocery store We were living up in the very remote town of Eureka, Montana, and there was a group of core members of the group of the Oath Keepers and some associates, and they were having a conversation at that public area where they were talking about how the Holocaust was not real. And that was, for me, something I just could not abide. And, you know, we were not wealthy people at all. We were barely surviving, and it didn't matter. I went home to my wife and my kids, and I told them that I've got to walk away at this point. I don't know how we're going to survive or where we're going to go or what we're going to do, but I just can no longer continue, and put in my resignation.
A group that denies the Holocaust is one of the groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, that they're highlighting that very much had a premeditated effort to attack the Capitol and wanted to act as Trump's private military who could allow him to stay in power. Scary, scary stuff. They then brought another witness who stormed the Capitol himself. He was charged for storming the Capitol, video evidence of it. And he's now changed his view on all this, and he describes what brought him to the Capitol and why he believed these theories.
I was, pretty hardcore into the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I followed, President Trump, on all of the websites, he basically put out, come to Stop the Steal rally, and I felt like I needed to be down here.
A little bit sad. He's in these right-wing social media spaces, he's following Trump, and because of it, he was so deluded that he thought he was doing some patriotic thing by attacking the Capitol, and now he's paying the price, and Trump is not yet paying the price. The same witness then asked if he still believed the election was stolen, and again, a little sad, honestly, because he says he doesn't believe it anymore, but when describing why, it's like he goes through what we all were able to do instantly when these claims were made, which is just analyze the facts of the situation and go, okay, clearly these are false claims being made. And it's great that he now was able to do that, but a little bit sad that you can be so brainwashed by the media echo chambers that you're in, that it takes you being arrested and charged and forced to stop consuming that media before you're able to critically think in that way.
And do you still believe the election was stolen?
Not so much now. I got away from all the social media when January 6th happened, basically deleted it all. I started doing my own research and everything, and for something like that to actually take place, it's too big. There's no way you can keep something like that quiet, as big as something like that. With all the lawsuits being shot down one after another. That was mainly what convinced me.
Next, that same witness was asked originally, "Were you planning on going to the Capitol from the beginning?" And he said, "No. I was just going to see Trump's speech." So then he was asked a follow-up, as you'll see here, which was, then why'd you go? And this was his answer.
So why'd you decide to march to the Capitol?
Well, basically, the president, got everybody riled up, told everybody head on down. So we basically were just following what he said.
Guys, so sad. And horrible that Trump would do this to so many people. Of course, they're responsible for their actions, absolutely, and I'm happy he's being held criminally responsible, this guy, but it is sad in a way that people are able to be brainwashed, as I said, by both Trump and right-wing media to believe just false things that lead them to storming the Capitol. And another thing is it makes clear that at least some of the audience there wouldn't have stormed the Capitol. They weren't planning on it if it wasn't for Trump's speech that day. Finally, on this guy, he was asked, "Why did you leave the Capitol?" Fascinating response.
That afternoon, and then left the Capitol area later on. What made you decide to leave?
Basically, when President Trump put his tweet out, we literally left right after that come out. To me, if he would have done that earlier in the day, 1:30, we wouldn't be in this. Maybe we wouldn't be in this bad of a situation or something.
Thank you.
And he's exactly right. He's laying out there. If Trump had sent out that tweet earlier, many people like him would have left. They were just following what they felt like were orders from him. Again, not justified, still bad that they did it. They should still be held criminally responsible, all those things. But it proves the point that Trump had the power to call off the people on that day, as we all are aware. The former Oath Keeper, who we previously saw, then was asked again to make some remarks about some different things. And one of the things he said was really impactful. So let's watch.
I think we need to quit mincing words and just talk about truths. And what it was going to be was an armed revolution. I mean, people died that day. Law enforcement officers died this day. There was a gallows set up in front of the Capitol. This could have been the spark that started a new civil war, and no one would have won there. That would have been good for no one.
Again, he's exactly right. And finally, that same witness, that former Oath Keeper, gave a stark warning, informed by his time within these violent and dangerous organizations that look up to Trump. Informed by that experience, he gives a warning about how threatened America is right now by these radical groups who follow Trump's words.
I think we've gotten exceedingly lucky that more bloodshed did not happen because the potential has been there from the start. And we got very lucky that the loss of life was, and as tragic as it is, that we saw on January 6th, the potential was so much more. Again, all we have to look at is the iconic images of that day with the gallows set up for Mike Pence, for the Vice President of the United States. You know, and I do fear for this next election cycle, because who knows what that might bring. If a president that's willing to try to instill and encourage to whip up a civil war amongst his followers using lies and deceit and snake oil, and regardless of the human impact, what else is he going to do if he gets elected again? All bets are off at that point. And that's a scary notion. I have 3 daughters. I have a granddaughter. And I fear for the world that they will inherit if we do not start holding these people to account.
A great message. And I think it means something coming from someone who knows the threat that these groups pose, because he saw it. He was within it. He had to leave because he saw how disgusting and vile these right-wing white supremacist organizations are that want to do a lot of damage in this country. And if we don't hold the top dog accountable, Donald Trump, of all of these groups who follow him closely and who are loyal to him, then we are threatening our own future. And that is a important and stark warning for our country. So I do encourage you to watch the full thing yourself. We'll be going over in a future segment the wild meeting that was depicted in these hearings that happened at the White House, almost escalated to the point of physical confrontations between different White House members and different Trump allies based on how much they disagreed on how Trump should proceed. So really, really crazy stuff to go over in that segment. Make sure to check it out, and make sure to check me out on Twitter at Luke P. Beasley, and I'll see you with much more on this in that future segment.